Right, I discovered last week, possibly the week before, there was something called queer coding, right? Which is where I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but authors or people who, make things would make someone quite gay, intentionally or unintentionally. So, an example would be the second Nightmare on Elm Street, which is like regarded as one of the gayest horror movies ever made. And the guy who played the main character in it, Jesse, he came out as gay later on, and then the writer had said, "Oh, I didn't know there was a subtext to that." But the director was like, "I didn't know there was a subtext to this. Like, I didn't know it was quite a gay movie." And there's a scene in a gay club, and then afterwards the coach makes him like run laps while the coach is dressed in leather, and then the coach dies by getting his ass whipped to death and that. But I say that because I discovered this. I was talking to someone and I discovered this concept of queer coding, and the first thing I thought of was An Interview with a Vampire. Have you seen it? Where Tom Cruise and Kirsten Dunst, like...
I think I've seen bits.
Oh, is it Tom Cruise?
I can't remember it properly though.
But let me find out who it is, right? Interview with a Vampire. And I always thought... Yeah, is that Tom Cruise?
We've watched so many films.
Yeah, it is Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Kirsten Dunst, right? And I always thought as a kid that they're just like really good friends, like the two guys in it. Like I read the book before I saw the film when I was a kid. And I was like, those two vampires, like they're really good friends. It's kind of odd how they argue like that sometimes though. It's more like man and wife, like, oh well, it must just be really good friends who argue sometimes. And then I discovered this term queer coding. And I was like, that is the gayest shit I've ever seen in my life, is those two vampires. It's just... So yeah, is there anything that you can think of that as a kid you were like, oh, they're just friends? And then looking at back now, you're like, oh, no, they're just really gay, but you couldn't really say it.
That guy off Art Attack and the statue.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What was he called? Was he called Neil?
I don't know, but there was a statue that spoke.
So the guy off Art Attack, Neil Buchanan,
yeah,
and the head,
yeah,
you always thought they were gay together.
Now I do. I thought it was unusual at the time. I was like, a bit over the top.
Huh, okay. Fair enough.
But surprisingly, Philip Schofield never thought he was gay. I just thought he was an effeminate man. Like my granddad, just like... Yeah.
Huh.
Was expressive. I didn't think of him as gay expressive, though.
Yeah. It's weird, though, because, like, you start looking at all this stuff, and anyway, hello, welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about werewolves and vampires, but hang on a second. You start looking at this stuff, and you're like... Cause it all stemmed from a conversation about Sam and Frodo. There's a lot of people who think that they're gay. Now, I heavily disagree with that. And I heavily disagree with it because...
Frodo's gay, definitely.
Well, yeah, probably. But it takes away that you can just have really good friends. Like, why does there have to be more to it? Like, why can you not just... As a man who loves his friends dearly...
But Legolas and Gimli, I don't think they're very gay.
But they are most likely to be gay together. They're the most... I think of every... I think, well, no...
That's just because of that fan fiction that you read.
No, it's not.
And you can't get it out your head, because as soon as I thought of their friendship... I was like, oh, but they did that, didn't they? And they didn't actually do what... No, right. They didn't plait each other's hair and that.
Right, okay, but this is... You remember a lot about that story.
Because it was interesting, it was like gossip.
But I think... So it was said somewhere that Legolas and Gimli was toned down for the films. But like they're like in the books and that, they're
well, it's bromance.
Exactly. Well, that was my point about Sam and Frodo, is that like you don't have to be gay, right? Just to love your friends. And then there was the point of called like reader response theory, where it's like, well, it's more about what your interpretation of the words are. And I still don't agree that.
Is it
Frodo
because you've got a big bromance, you and John and?
Well, I love him very much, and I get upset when we don't speak, and
you brush hands with him, accidentally all the time.
I do, and then when I don't speak to him for a few days, I do say to you that like I'm getting quite fed up
Yeah,
he hasn't spoken to
getting
me.
the big sad.
So yeah, there's a very fine line between being bros and being ho bros, but yeah. Anyway, that was a bit of a nonsense one. It's October. It's spooky. It's spooky month.
Spooky skeletons.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn you down a little bit because that you just spluttered into the microphone, nearly blew my fucking eardrums out. I think I've turned myself down actually. There's me not knowing how to use my equipment. I turned myself down. Where am I? Can you speak so I know?
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Hamora.
Oh shit, I was turning myself down. Right, levels sorted. Right, it's October. It's spooky.
The nuts are falling off the tree.
The nuts are falling off the tree. We have been collecting them with our daughter. How have you been? We're going to cover spooky shit this month, so let's get the good stuff out of the way first. How have you been? I fucking warned you about this before we started.
I am fine, I think.
Yeah.
I am working on myself.
It's a good way to say you're unemployed.
I'm unemployed by my own choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Out of valuing and respecting myself.
Absolutely, yeah. I've been telling you for months, like you don't stay somewhere that doesn't value you. And
my goodwill has run out, so I've left. And I've got a few interviews lined up. So that's exciting.
One of which is at a mortuary, which is pretty cool.
So fingers crossed, because I've always wanted to work within a funeral home. Not for spooky reasons.
Is it because you like flowers?
I just think it's a lovely thing to do, to take care of families in these times, because death is inevitable. Everyone is going to die. It's the most sure thing in life. And we're very open. We talk about death all of the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm excited, but just kind of trying to keep myself occupied and revving up. And my course has started again. So I've got uni to do. So very exciting. What about you?
Yeah, good. I mean, I'm not going to go into as much detail as that.
I'm trying not to That's why I've gone into so much detail, because I'm trying not to
We went to Comic-Con on Saturday in Edinburgh. It was beautiful. If anybody's listening who saw me wandering around with me and Becca were wandering around with our t-shirts on, with the logo on. It was black. Now, this annoyed me though. Being a fairly extroverted person, or being a fairly confident, charismatic person, if I do say so myself, and wearing a black t-shirt at a convention, the amount of people who thought I worked there was fucking ridiculous. I went to get a picture with Andy Serkis, and as we were queuing up, they put us into 3 queues. There was Andy and Elijah, and just Elijah, right? And I was saying, hey, are you just for Andy Serkis? And I was trying to find my way at the back of the queue, because it was all just a mess. But it must have been the way I was asking people, that people then started showing me their tickets and asking if they were in the right place, and when I could expect to get their photo done. And I was like, I don't fucking work here. I'm trying to find the back of the queue. I'm trying to get a photo myself. But that didn't deter people who kept saying, well, what about diamond passes? I was like, I don't fucking know, man. It's not what to do with me. There was a lot of queues.
But luckily, me and the child didn't get involved in any of the queues. So that was good. Apart from one queue that was for a cup of tea. And once I'd queued and got to the front, the woman said, oh, it's cash only. And that was the first time I found out it was cash only. And I was like, why would I stand with a toddler in a queue if I didn't know that? I'm not just going to stand in a queue for shits and giggles.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, it's been going on too long. So Comic-Con was great. Got a picture with Andy Serkis. Met lots of nice people. Met 2 amazing costumes of Thorin and Dwalin, which was class. The Thorin guy was very in character, because he was like a very standoffish prick.
I loved all the Star Wars stuff.
That was a joke, by the way. He was very nice. Yeah, all the Star Wars stuff was good.
Because I'm a Star Wars nerd. There was a woman dressed like really cool. She was like part of, I would say, the newer Star Wars.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's what we've been up to. Now, let's get into today, because there's just up top, right? We're going to cover werewolves and vampires from the Tolkien point of view. if I was talking about werewolves and vampires from a real world inspiration, we would still be sat here come next October. There's a lot in it. There is a lot in this. So we're going to cover werewolves and vampires as part of our spooky October, and then we'll get back to normal in November. But yeah, so werewolves and vampires together because there's not a great deal about them in the lore. But can you give us an overview? What's a werewolf? What's a vampire? What are some famous examples in real world?
A werewolf is a shapeshifter between man and wolf. Usually happens on a full moon.
Mm-hmm.
And they always seem to have backup clothes somewhere.
I've thought that
really
as well,
exciting.
yeah.
Famous examples are Jacob.
Yep.
Who was the guy off... There used to be a CBBC programme which had... what was he called? Forgot the name now.
I don't know.
Just cut this bit out.
No, I'll leave it in. Live with your mistakes.
No.
Who else? Can you think of anybody else?
I'm really bad at this. Why can't I remember any werewolves?
To be fair, right, there's not...
Teen werewolf?
Yeah, there's not a great deal of, like you'll know werewolves, or you can talk about werewolf
They're not
films.
usually the predominant character.
No, I think it might be because they're pack animals, not one stands out. Where vampires are much more singular.
Vampires are living dead, and they sustain themselves by drinking blood of humans. Famous ones are Edward Cullen.
Yeah, for your sins.
Dracula.
Oh, he came second, did he?
Well, I had to use Edward Cullen because I'd used Jacob as an example of werewolves. I was trying to use him first because of that. But Dracula's the biggest example and the best example. And we live quite close to Whitby.
Yes, we do. Yeah, we
where
do.
Dracula apparently
washed up, yeah.
Washed up upon the coast and walked up to the Abbey. So, yeah.
All right, well...
More examples of vampires.
No,
but
well, I'm sure there are. I don't want to burst your bubble too much, though, but Tolkien's Vampires and Werewolves, almost nothing like these.
Remus Lupin.
Ah, yeah.
Why didn't I think of him as a werewolf?
You shitter. Aye. Well, do you know what's really fucking annoying? I googled, I couldn't think of the name of the Hellhound from Norse mythology. I knew Fenrir was obviously the great wolf that like bites off Tyr's arm and a hand and what have you. And I was looking for the name of the other one, which was Gorma, and I couldn't find the name, so I typed in Fenrir or the wolf, and the first result that came up was Fenrir Greyback from Harry Potter. I was like, people have ruined the fucking internet.
Yeah,
this is bullshit.
I've just seen Fenrir.
Oh, right. Werewolves and vampires in Tolkien, they really only show up in the tale of Beren and Luthien, you know. And Luthien, of course, being the daughter of Thingol, the king of Doriath, and Melian, the Maiar,
Yeah.
who was queen of Doriath. Beren being the mortal man who marries Luthien. They go on an adventure. I made a meme the other week about breaking into hell and stealing from him just so you could marry someone's daughter. But yeah, werewolves and vampires primarily encountered in the tale of Beren and Luthien. They are mentioned elsewhere. One of Sauron's titles is like Lord of the Werewolves, and we'll get into that as well. But there's also the wargs from the films.
Yeah.
They may be descended or related to werewolves, and we'll come on to that in the Third Age. But as you can imagine, much of it fits with that motif of a world in decline. So let's start with the first one. And this is quite nice because it made me think it looked a lot better than it did. But the first werewolf was called Draugluin, and he is the father of all werewolves. And his name means blue wolf in Sindarin due to the colour of his fur, which I thought was pretty cool. And then I realised it's probably like that super deep blue that's almost black.
It's like petrol.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And he is described in the Silmarillion as the sire of all werewolves. And I'll read a short little passage for you here. A dread beast, old in evil, lord and sire of the werewolves of Angband. His might was great. And that the good thing is about this episode is a lot of the descriptions are so short we can fit them in. So that's the first werewolf, and allegedly he was made by Sauron, and it said that Sauron imprisoned an evil spirit within the shape of a great wolf. So Sauron would breed the great wolves, then imprison a spirit in them, and that's what makes them the werewolf, is having that evil spirit within them that gives them the intelligence.
Ah, that's cool.
Yeah, and it's possible that this spirit might have been a fallen Maiar that was corrupted. And I got into this discussion the other day with some people where, in the cosmology, right, you are aware of the Ainur, which is the Valar and the Maiar, but other spirits are referred to, such as the spirits that would inhabit what would become the Ents and give them like the intelligence and what have you. But it's not quite clear what they are. They might not be qualified to be Maiar, but they are still spirits there. So if we could ask Tolkien a question, it'd be like, if you have the Valar, you have the Maiar, is there anything underneath that of like lesser spirits that you'd want to talk about? Because there's some that kind of fit into that you can't quite rightly call Maiar. And I think the spirits that go into werewolves might be of that type. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've just mentioned that, like, so the evil spirit inhabiting a body and then being able to reproduce and create more of it, it kind of comes, do you remember our Orc episode? Which is like over 20 episodes ago now. Our Orc episode was our 8th episode, and we're now on our 29th.
Blooming heck.
I know, but yeah, our Orc episode, so we talked about something like, there was a theory that corrupted Maiar would take the shape of like big orcs or trolls and breed with corrupted elves and humans to make more orcs. So I thought, is there something kind of like in that? Interestingly enough, we do have like a birthplace for werewolves, like the main kind of birthplace, and it's a tower or an island called, well, it's an island. It's called Tol in Gawroth, which is the Isle of Werewolves. But
makes sense.
Yeah, I know, right? Call it like you see it. Tol in Gawroth began life as a watchtower called Minas Tirith, which sounds familiar, right? Yeah, not the same place, but is, that's where Minas Tirith gets its name from.
Ah.
And this Minas Tirith that we're talking about in the First Age in Beleriand was built by Finrod Felagund, who was a great elf king, and I think Felagund is the first elf to discover humans, and he sings for them and he teaches them loads of stuff, and it's just well, he's the first one to discover humans in Beleriand. Arguably the Nandor elves that we've discussed before helped humans along earlier than that. And he had this watchtower built called Minas Tirith to guard the Vale of Sirion, and because he was a king and it was part of his kingdom, and he entrusted it to one of his kin, Orodreth. I think it might be his uncle or his nephew. I don't know. Anyway, I'd have to look it up. But then Orodreth, when Sauron rocked up with his armies, Orodreth couldn't hold the tower, so he fled, and Sauron just moved in and turned it to shit, as usual, as is Sauron's wont.
Well, he doesn't take along cleaners or anything with him.
No, he doesn't.
So,
do you know, it's so topical you mentioned that, because I downloaded a demo earlier, because there's something on called the Steam Next Fest or something, where you get loads of game demos to see what's coming out. And one I thought you might like is called Crime Scene Cleaner.
oh yes.
But you work for the mafia, so you go and clean up their crime scenes before the police get there. And yeah, it looks pretty cool. So yeah, Sauron didn't have any crime scene cleaners, unfortunately.
Oh well.
But yeah, so this is where Sauron, when he took over and began to breed great and terrible wolves, and once he'd bred the great and terrible wolves, he trapped evil spirits in them.
Do they ever manage to make their way off the island? Because wolves don't swim.
There was a bridge. Dogs can swim. Our dog swims all the time.
Yeah, but surely wolves...
I think they could.
I suppose... Are they always wolves?
Yes, they
Okay.
don't shapeshift. They are just great and terrible. Because shapeshifters are their own thing. Like, they're called
Yeah.
like skin changers, like Beorn.
Yeah.
But so of all these werewolves, Draugluin was the first of them. and we haven't covered them yet, but you'll have seen these names crop up time and time again. But in the tale of Beren and Luthien, Draugluin stayed with Sauron in Tol in Gawroth, so I think he existed before that. But that was their great breeding place because he helped Sauron conquer the Isle, and he stayed there to guard it. He was
This is mine.
Yeah, exactly. He's pissed. He pissed on the door mantle. It was like mine. So Beren, at one point in the tale of Beren and Luthien, had been captured along with Finrod Felagund, the guy who built it, and he got imprisoned within the tower he had built. And they got there was 12 of them. So there was Finrod, there was Beren, and there was 10 elves, right, who would help Beren.
Yeah.
And they got imprisoned in the bottom of Tol Ungaroth in the pits in the dungeon. And it's described that there was werewolves in the pits, and the werewolves would pick them off one by one. So all they'd see is like glowing red eyes in the dark, and one of them would be taken. And at last, it's only Finrod and Beren left. And Finrod uses the last of his strength to break free of his chains and wrestle with the werewolf, but he dies in the process, but it allows Beren to survive. So,
wouldn't you think if he's like, if you're going to build something, you know the ins and outs of it, and you would kind of put secret passages in case you got trapped in it?
Well, you remember Sauron is a servant of Aule, so Sauron would have made modifications, I'd imagine. It doesn't seem very...
He doesn't hire a cleaner, but he makes adjustments to it.
It just doesn't seem very noble and elf-like to have pits in your dungeon. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't quite ring true.
But they clearly do have dungeons or somewhere.
They've got cells, yeah. They would have cells, but I don't think there'd be pits full of werewolves. That doesn't seem very elfish.
Don't know. That might be the top security
device.
Flight,
top flight security of the world, Craig. No. Yeah, first age elves were much more vicious, but they weren't like out. Well, some of them arguably were out and out evil, but I don't think Finrod Felagund would have done this. He was the goodest of guys. There was Finrod and there was Fingolfin, two of the goodest lads you could imagine. So yeah, Finrod fights a werewolf with his bare hands, which is an amazing feat of strength, which allows Beren to survive, right? And at the same time, Luthien had found where Beren was, and so she stood on the bridge to Tol in Gawroth, and she sang as loudly as she could. And this gave heart to Beren when he could hear her, so he sang back as well. And Sauron was at the top of the tower, and he heard her sing, and he smiled to himself because he knew it was the daughter of Melian, and Morgoth desired her in, for lack of a better term, a very rapey way. Like, it's the literal devil. Like, so he has fantasies of like crushing her. Like, he's fucking horrible about it. So Sauron was like, I will get such a reward if I take her to him. So one by one he sends his werewolves out. But what Sauron doesn't know is that with them is the Hound of the Valar, Huan, who is the best dog. You saw a picture of him earlier and you said, oh, that's cute. Huan, the Hound of the Valar, is one of the best characters in the entire Silmarillion. He's just fucking mint. So one by one, Luthien's on the bridge, the werewolves come out, and Huan ambushes them. He grabs them by the throat, tears the throat out and kills them. And eventually, old Draugluin himself is forced to come out. And Draugluin and Huan fight, and eventually Draugluin is injured, mortally injured.
Oh,
so he limps his way back to Sauron, and just before he dies, he tells Sauron that Huan was there. And your logical question might be, why is Sauron bothered about a dog? That would be my question, right? Well, it turns out that Huan is a bit of a special boy. He's got a prophecy about him that everybody in Beleriand seems to know about, like all the Maiar, and that they all seem to know about him. And his fate is well known. And Huan has been given special powers by the Valar, and his special powers are that he can speak only 3 times in his life, but he can speak the language of humans or men or mortals or whatever, or elves. And he's immortal to anything except being killed by the greatest wolf that ever lived. Now, Sauron is a shapeshifter, right? So you remember earlier I said one of his titles is a Lord of Werewolves?
Yeah.
So Sauron thinks to himself,
Must be me.
gotta be me. It's gotta be me. So he has his Justin Timberlake moment, right? And he says, it's gotta be me. And he transforms, because Sauron's a shapeshifter, he's well known as a shapeshifter. He loses that ability by the Third Age. After the downfall of Numenor at the end of the Second Age, Sauron loses his ability to shapeshift, but now he's in his prime, he can transform into fucking all sorts, and he does. And one of the things he takes on is a great and terrible wolf, and so thinking that it's his, he's the one who can kill Huan, he takes on this form, and he goes out to meet him, and he is very wrong. He is not the greatest wolf to ever live, but he is so terrifying at that point that Huan jumps aside. Like, even Huan's like, nah, I don't want any of this. Until Sauron go in a werewolf form, a great and terrible wolf, like a wolf the size of a fucking elephant, right? Goes for Luthien, and that's at that point Huan, being the goodest boy, he's like, no, I'll protect her, and he fights with Sauron, and Sauron ends up getting his ass whooped, which is just perfect, right? So Huan gets Sauron in wolf form. He gets Sauron in his jaws and he won't let go. He's biting him and he won't let go. And Sauron flicks through all the different forms that he can.
This sounds like the Warner Brothers Studios could really sort of get their teeth into this.
Exactly. Yeah, fucking right. Oh.
You know when...
just this part of the Tale of Beren and Luthien.
Yeah, you know when the dark wizards in Harry Potter, they travel so fast that they're like smoke.
Yeah, do you know what? I kind of weirdly enough, I imagine something similar to that. Yeah.
Or what's the female character called where she can change like her face shape?
Oh, Tonks. Yeah.
Tonks, like that sort of like changing. That's the vibes I'm getting.
So it's pretty much that. Yeah, like he goes through all the different forms, like monstrous forms, his own form, everything. But Huan won't go. So Luthien says to him, and she's really badass, she says, like, yield the tower to me, or I'll strip you of the raiment of your flesh and send you back to Morgoth as a ghost. And then if you've got to go back to him as a ghost, he will scorn you forever. So, and that's just amazing that, like, Luthien, the daughter of Melian and Thingol, threatens Sauron and wins. So Sauron, he gives up control of the island. It goes back to being an elf-held fortress, and he flees, and he takes on the form of a vampire, a great vampire. And I won't read out the description yet because we've got a vampire bit coming up. But Sauron, this is one of the first times, I think it's either the first, there's only 2 times vampires are mentioned. This is one of them. Sauron turns into a giant vampire creature and goes away to Tar Nufui, which is a forest that, surprise, surprise, he fucking fills with horrible things, just like Mirkwood. And that, so that is...
I like his confidence though.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
because
yeah.
if he didn't appear in front of Luthien and Huan,
Huan, yeah. Huan.
With so much confidence and kind of they wouldn't have stood back and been like, he wouldn't have thought of him as a threat.
Yeah, oh no. Oh yeah, true. Oh yeah, true.
So he goes in
full
steam ahead, thinking he's the big bollocks, when actually he isn't, but because he's given that air about him.
Oh, that's good, yeah. So the island goes back to being elf controlled. Unfortunately, Morgoth then takes back control after the Nea-Naiath-Annoidiad, which is the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, or it's just called Unnumbered Tears actually, which is a very sad part of the First Age where a lot of shit goes down, which is it's too big to go into. It's a fucking huge battle that reaches. It's a very far-reaching event, but if Sauron wasn't the greatest and most terrible of all werewolves, then who was? And I want to introduce you to the name Karkaroth. And he enters into the tale of Beren and Luthien, and he is the greatest werewolf to ever live. He swallows a Silmaril and Beren's hand along with it, but the jewel burns him and causes him agony, which turns him into the most terrifying and powerful thing in Beleriand at that time. He's described as like a destroying fire, and everybody flees from him. And
Wouldn't like to poop that out.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And Karkaroth is strong enough to break through the girdle of Melian. Do you know that enchantment around the woods of Doriath that doesn't let any evil pass it?
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, nah, too legit to quit. He breaks through, like in his agony. And he was chosen by Morgoth himself to be raised by Morgoth in answer to Huan, the Hound of Alnor. So when I said everybody knew Huan's prophecy, Morgoth knew it as well. So he chose a whelp and raised him himself. And I'm going to read out the most Goth passage in my opinion, in the Silmarillion. And it said that Ari Morgoth, he fed him with his own hand upon living flesh, and put his power upon him. Swiftly the wolf grew, until he could creep into no den, but lay huge and hungry before the feet of Morgoth. There the fire and anguish of hell entered into him, and he became filled with a devouring spirit, tormented, terrible, and strong. Karkaroth, the Red Maw, he is named in the tales of those days, and Anfauglia, the jaws of thirst. And Morgoth set him to lie unsleeping before the doors of Angband, lest Huan come. And is that just not goth as fuck?
Yeah, I like it.
Big dog outside my house. But it's just the spirit of hell entered him.
Hellhound.
Sorry, the fire and anguish of hell entered into him. Exactly. So you said Hellhound there, right? That was my first thought, and this it indisputable, right? Some people say he's only talking about Fenrir because he bites off Beren's hand and what have you, just like Fenrir does with Tyr. But there's also Cerberus, the hound that guards Hades. There's Fenrir, obviously. There's Skoll and Hati, and then there's Garma, who is the Norse hellhound. And I think Karkaroth is just all of these rolled into one.
Yeah.
Like all of these like demonic dogs, essentially. Well, Skoll and Hati aren't super duper demonic.
Especially if like Morgoth kind of leeches into his surroundings. If he's that close, the dog's that close to him,
Yes.
then he's gonna leech into the dog.
That's fucking
not the dog,
yeah,
but the wolf.
Yeah, that's right. You said I could shag you. That's fucking.
Christopher.
That's fucking mint that you said that though. Yes, you're 100% right. And it says like you put his spirit into him, and that is as well because there's a certain point where I think there's a passage where it's like, oh no, it's with one of the dragons where they also say that Morgoth puts his power into them, and it's like a spark of his malice and his hatred is within the creature itself. And Morgoth is known to do that. He divests his power into the
Like,
into the
owners
physical
look
world.
like they're dogs.
Yeah, pretty much. That's it. Yeah. So when Karkaroth he bites off Beren's hand, like I mentioned, he's driven mad and runs wild through Beleriand, and servants of Morgoth run from him. Nobody wants to be near him. And it's said that of everything in the world before the War of Wrath, when Angband falls, of everything in the world, Karkaroth was the worst thing up until the War of Wrath. That's how terrifying he was. He was the most terrible.
I feel like he's misunderstood.
He's intelligent, so he's not just a wild animal. Like he's malice and dread himself. Like, so he makes his way to Doriath, breaks through the girdle of Melian, and Thingol and Beren and some others. They hunt the dog and they hunt the wolf, and Huan goes with them. And he and Huan eventually fight and kill each other, but not before Karkaroth kills Beren by biting him in the chest, and he dies of his wound shortly after. But don't worry though, Beren doesn't stay dead. That's not really the end of his story. It's that one, do you know that playlist you listen to go to sleep? There's one song in there, it's called like The Lament of Luthien or something like that. and that's someone's take of her singing before Mandos, who is the Valar who keeps the spirits, right, until they're ready to move on. So Beren, I think, is one of the only mortal men to ever have been resurrected or not allowed to pass beyond the circles of the world. And again, it's its whole story, but Luthien was half elf, half Maya, but she chose to be human after this, so that her and Beren could live together for for some years together longer, and then they both pass out of the world. And Luthien is Arwen's ancestor.
Yeah.
And so that's when Aragorn first meets her in the woods. He says Tinuviel, because he thinks he's run into a vision of Luthien again. But again, that's besides the point. We're goth at the moment. We're not talking about romance. We'll do Beren and Luthien for Valentine's Day. So those are three of the most notable werewolves, if you count Sauron. Evil and terrible, and gothic and cruel, right? That's 4 words we can describe them.
Yeah.
And like most other things, their heyday is in the First Age, right? But it is important to note that in the book, Gandalf mentions that werewolves are Sauron's servants in the Third Age, so they must still be kicking about somewhere.
Just not as prolific.
Yeah, exactly, and they don't appear in the War of the Ring. There's also and then like we go to the Third Age and we have a look, right, and say like, well, who's still kicking about? So there's the wolves from The Hobbit. They might be descended from werewolves because they can speak. They've got their own language and they work together with the orcs in the Battle of Five Armies.
Yeah.
And then there's also the wargs, who are demonic wolves. So it's kind of suggested that wargs are inhabited by evil spirits as well, but of less stature than werewolves. So again, yeah, I could kind of buy it. By the Third Age, everything's like dying off and what have you. So yeah, if wargs are just lesser werewolves, then yeah, I could see that. Instead of being the size, imagine if werewolves are still around the Third Age, and instead of Oliphants at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, you get werewolves the size of Oliphants. That'd be pretty fucking...
Sounds mint.
That'd be terrifying. I think Grond, do you know the ram, the battering ram? I think that might be... Yeah. I think that might be in like a likeness of Karkaroth. Because it's got the fire in its jaws and that, like the red maw.
Yeah.
But again, I can't see... I can't speak to that because I'd have to go and look it up. But yeah, that's it. They had their own language. They were intelligent, and that's where we. But that's pretty much all we can say about werewolves. It's not a great deal of information, which is a shame. But also kind of, you can't explain everything, and maybe some things are best left unstuck because I don't know. Maybe,
yeah, that's not Tolkien's jam.
Yeah, maybe you just thought like, I couldn't ever compete with Bram Stoker. Or like I'm not telling a story about vampires and werewolves. Like they've got no place in my story.
Yeah, he's got enough characters to deal with. Really.
Yeah. So we'll talk about vampires for a little bit because we're coming towards the end. There's not a great deal to say about vampires from the point of view of Tolkien, and we've got a couple of descriptions. And the first is Sauron when he is fleeing. Do you know after he gets beaten by Luthien and Huan?
Yeah.
And he is described as great as a dark cloud across the moon, and he fled, dripping blood from his throat upon the trees, and came to Tar Nufuin and dwelt there, filling it with horror. And apart from Sauron, there's one more vampire, and she is called Thuringwethil, and she is Sauron's messenger. And she is killed at some point. It's not entirely sure how she's killed. It's probably Huan, because Luthien. So Beren and Luthien, Draugluin and Thuringwethil. Luthien and Beren dress up as them to get into Angband. So using some magic, they take the pelt of Draugluin and dress Beren up as him, so he becomes like a wolf, but he's just got different eyes.
Yeah.
And then they make Luthien look like the great vampire to get into Angband to like get in front of Morgoth.
Mm.
But that description that we have of it makes her sound more like a hideous bat creature than like, beautiful Edward Cullen or like sexy Tom Cruise,
Stefan Salvatore. He was at
was he at Comic-Con? Yeah. We've got a description here of Thuringwethil of she was the messenger of Sauron and was wont to fly in vampire's form to Angband, and her great fingered wings were barbed at each joint's end with an iron claw. But I did find a little bit of verse, which sounds a little bit better, I think. So this is from the Tale of Beren and Luthien, where it's put down as a poem. The other was a bat-like garb, with mighty-fingered wings a barb, like iron nail at each joint's end, such wings as their dark cloud extend. Against the moon, when in the sky, from deadly nightshade screeching fly.
That sounds very romantic.
I think it sounds better. And interestingly, I'm going to trigger everyone here and remind you of your English teacher. The line where she's saying deadly nightshade is actually referring to Tarnufuin, which when you translate it from Sindarin, it's like forest in the night or nightshade. So it's not clear whether Tarnufuin is...
you philologist.
It's not clear whether... Did you know Tolkien was a philologist? It's not clear whether Tarnufuin was already a haunted forest and then Sauron rocked up, or it was just a normal forest with a bit more dark trees than usual and he fucked it up. But I'd like to believe the latter because he has a track record of wrecking forests.
Yeah.
Well, 3 if you count the forest that used to be Fangorn that spread all across Eriador, but he deforested it in the Second Age.
So there's no reason behind him going from shapeshifting into a werewolf then into a vampire as he
disappears. He just takes on different forms as he wants. It's just weird.
And interesting that it's a vampire when his what is a vampire? His
messenger
is a vampire.
Maybe it was his lover.
He's taken inspiration from her.
There is speculation that Thuringwethil might be a Maya herself because there's not many other mentions of vampires. It might just be a form that she takes on, or she might be a skin changer, like Beorn. We don't know. I don't know.
I'm assuming vampires in Tolkien's universe are just bat-like creatures.
Yeah.
There's no blood sucking.
I don't know. We don't know because those are the only everything I've said there. That's the only descriptions we get of vampires. That's all we get. But I thought you might be interested in this last bit of vampires. Is that our version of super suave, sophisticated, sexy vampires appear to originate from a story from 1819 called The Vampire, spelled with a Y, and was written by John Polidori. And then after that, there's another famous vampire story we can look at called Carmilla from Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. And that was in like 1872, I think, something like that. And then after that, we get Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is the most popular, but was actually released after these other two. So Bram Stoker's Dracula wasn't until 1897, but these other two, with that concept of a sexy, sophisticated, suave vampire, was predated by 2 other books, which is pretty interesting. Shall we have a look at a bit of language, just to finish us off? Just a bit of philology.
Go on then.
So,
I thought I was getting away with...
Nah, you bollocks. So, the Sindarin word for werewolf is Gower, as obviously Tol in Gowroth. The Quenya name is Nauro, and then that's for werewolf. And then for wolf, the Quenya name is Namo. And there are similar words in other elf languages, such as Doriathrin, which is Garm, and Noldorin, which was Garaf. Then we look at the word Wag, and in Old Norse that comes from Vag, and in Old English it comes from Weag, which means an outlaw. But funnily enough, right, I discovered this today, and you can see it's on my picture there on my monitor of my background.
Yeah. Is that the Balrog?
Yeah, Balrogs and Wags share the same origin in a name. So there is an Old English word called Bealwag, which is Bealu, which is where we get the word baleful from, do you know what I mean, meaning like evil?
Yeah.
And then Weag, meaning outlaw, so evil outlaw, that was spooky, evil outlaw, and Tolkien got that word, just split it up into 2, made 2 creatures, a Balrog and a Wag.
Clever.
Ah. And then I just mentioned a language called Doriathrin, which I found out today is that obviously is the language of Doriath. which is just Sindarin with some odd preservation of archaic terms. And one is preferring one-syllable words over two. So Sindarin will use two-syllable words, whereas Doriathrin will use one. So for Sindarin, the word for horror is Goroth, and in Doriathrin, the word is Goth. And then full disclosure for everyone, I found out that fantastic little tidbit, and I was like, oh, why doesn't Doriathrin come up more? It might have become obsolete after the First Age, partly because of the ruin of Doriath, and partly because all the elves tended to just piss off and mix in together. So we look at the word werewolf. Comes from the Old English werewolf, which means man-wolf, and it's a cognate or equal to Middle Dutch weerwolf with the double E, the Middle Low German waarwolf, and the West Frisian waarul. And they all come from the pre-Germanic Wierowulpos, or possible Wazywulfas, which means wolf clothes. And then, in Old Norse, the term is Ulfhethna, which means wolf-skinned, and Ulfhethin, which is wolf coat. And good luck for me, because I don't know how to pronounce this one. In Old Irish, the term is Lukthon, which is wolf skin. And in Sanskrit, you've got Vukajna, which is wolf skin. And then you've got lycanthrope, which comes from the ancient Greek Lycanthropos, which means wolf human. And the only interesting tidbit that I picked out in my time researching this, because I'm not going to lie, people, this was a fucking slog. Just because of how big werewolf is, you've got to really pick and choose what you want to talk about in terms of the language. But you might remember with our Bayonne episode, we talked about taboo deformation, about how language changes. So in Old Norse, they suffered from taboo deformation as well. They used to have the word for werewolf wasn't man-wolf. It wasn't like wolf-man, it was more wolf-wolf, whereas the second wolf was their term for an outlaw, like a varg. So instead of calling a werewolf a wolf-man or a man-wolf, they would call it a wolf-wolf, whereas the first wolf is an animal, the second wolf is their term. They're like their term for an outlaw. An
outlawed wolf.
Yeah, because like their varg means like wolf or outlaw. So yeah, it's just I don't think they wanted that connotation of calling a wolf man. Like you might be saying, oh, that's an outlaw, and they didn't want that for their mythical creatures for some reason. But yeah, fuck knows. For the first time in my life, I had to cut short the language section because I was like, there's just too much here. It's too crazy. Like it is. Then we move on to vampires. A little bit of language about that. We've got Thurin Gwethil, which is split up into 3 parts, but the name means woman of secret shadow, or she of hidden shadow. The name's Sindarin and can be broken down as Thurin and Gwath. Thurin means secret or hidden, and Gwath means shadow. And then the ending of like eel is obscure, but it possibly just makes it feminine. So that nobody really knows. And then I wrote here, fuck this, because the real world origin of the word vampire is very long, very complex. I was not about it. It was the same as werewolf. They've got complex and far-reaching histories, and a Middle Earth podcast is not the place to get that. So like there will be tons of podcasts on vampires. In fact, I think there's one like Monster Fuzz, 2 Irish lads who I listen to about like cryptozoology and that, and I think they've got like episodes about them. But the first, I just went for some like tidbits, and the first instance of English citing the word vampire was in 1732 in a news report about vampire epidemics in Eastern Europe, where like people were being dug up and staked through the heart and beheaded and that. And there was a little tidbit to say, well, actually it had already been discussed first in German and French literature, but they didn't speak English, so fuck them. But yeah, so interestingly enough, right, so the word vampire first appeared in English in 1732. Took less than 100 years to make it sexy and publish a book about it.
Us English people.
Because that John Polidori, he 1819, I think. Earlier in the episode, 1819, the vampire. So 1732 to 1819, he was born, heard about vampires, was like, I want to fuck one, and started
Bish,
writing.
bosh, bosh.
I want to do the monster mash.
Don't ruin the monster mash.
Oh, but it's a graveyard bash. Right, I think that's a good point to end it. So that's our first spooky episode of the season.
I'm gonna end with a little one-liner.
Oh, go on then.
From pickupline.net.
Yeah.
I'm a vampire in the streets, but a real devil in the sheets.
Oh, that's sexy. The only jokes I know about vampires are actually like just quite disgusting. So I don't really think it's appropriate to talk about them on a podcast.
You drive me batty.
Oh, you're so bad. Right. I'm gonna go. So have a good day wherever you are. Have a good one. Good evening, good night, whenever you listen to this. Have a lovely spooky October, or a cozy one if you're not into it. So goodbye from me, Chris.
And goodbye from Rebecca.
Bye.